The heavy gate creaked as Mia pushed it open, her boots crunching over broken glass and twisted metal. The smell hit her first, an awful mix of rust, old blood, and hopelessness. She covered her mouth with her sleeve, trying to keep her focus. Somewhere in this wreckage, behind years of neglect and cruelty, a lion was waiting. She moved carefully between the crumbling cages, the walls stained with the weight of what had once been alive. Then she saw him, Leo. He lay motionless at the back of a cage too small for him to even turn around. A thick, rusted chain ran from a steel collar around his neck to a concrete block anchored into the ground. His mane was patchy, his ribs pressed against his dull, dirty skin. His eyes, when they finally opened, were not the eyes of a king. They were the hollow eyes of something forgotten. Mia's chest tightened painfully. For 15 years this creature had known nothing but confinement, hunger, and silence. She crouched near the bars, careful not to startle him. He flinched slightly when her shadow crossed him, but he didn't growl or bare his teeth. He simply looked at her, a gaze so broken that it stripped every thought from her mind except one: get him out. The other rescuers behind her were already moving, setting up the equipment to break the locks, but Mia couldn't move. She stayed, speaking softly, even though she wasn't sure he could hear her. "We're here," she whispered. "You're not alone anymore." The team worked quickly, their faces tight with focus. As they prepared to cut the chain, Leo shifted, trying to stand, but his legs trembled and gave out beneath him. The sight made Mia's throat burn. She wanted to scream, to rage at whoever had done this, but there was no time for anger now, only action. The sound of the bolt cutter snapping through the chain echoed too loudly in the stillness. Leo jerked at the noise, his body tensing, but he didn't fight. He stayed there, breathing heavily, blinking as though he couldn't believe the weight around his neck was gone. The gate was pulled open. The rescuers stepped back, unsure of what would happen next. Even Mia froze, her hand hovering near her side, bracing herself for a charge, a roar, a desperate flight. Leo lifted his head slowly, his gaze moving to the open space beyond the bars. His whole body shook with the effort of rising to his feet. Step by painful step, he moved forward, every muscle in his body screaming in protest. And then, in a moment that none of them would ever forget, Leo reached Mia, lowered his massive head, and pressed it gently against her chest. Time stopped. The wind died. The world outside the broken walls vanished. Mia sank to her knees, wrapping her arms as far around him as she could, feeling his ragged breath against her heart. Tears streamed down her face, and behind her the rest of the team stood frozen, silent witnesses to a miracle. After 15 years of pain, Leo's first instinct was not violence. It was trust. It was forgiveness. It was hope. Mia stayed perfectly still, feeling Leo's weight press against her chest, the slow, shuddering breath that rattled through his broken body. His head was heavy, heavier than she expected, but she didn't move. She didn't dare. She let him lean, let him take from her whatever small comfort he needed. Around her, the other rescuers slowly lowered their tools, their hands falling to their sides. No one spoke. No one needed to. Leo's muscles quivered under his thin skin, exhaustion rolling off him in waves. It wasn't just physical. Mia could feel it in the way he clung to her, the way his whole being seemed to collapse into her arms. It was like he was pouring 15 years of silent suffering into this moment, letting it drain out with every slow, shaking breath. She tightened her arms around him, her heart breaking a little more. With every second he stayed there. He didn't lash out, he didn't run, he simply leaned, trusted. A creature who had been given every reason to hate humans, every reason to fear them, chose to rest against her instead. Mia buried her hand gently in the ragged fur of his mane, feeling how coarse it was, how brittle. He smelled of rust and old chains, of a life stolen from him, but she didn't flinch. She only held him tighter. One of the team members moved, stepping carefully closer with a stretcher, but Mia raised a hand without looking. Not yet. Not while Leo needed this. She wasn't sure how long they stayed like that, her knees aching from the hard ground, her arms numb from holding his weight. But none of it mattered. There was nowhere else she was supposed to be. Finally, Leo stirred. It wasn't much, just the faintest shift of his massive head, the beginning of him pulling away. Mia loosened her arms slowly, her heart aching at the loss of the contact. Leo blinked up at her, his eyes clearer now, less hollow. He was still trembling, still broken, but something had shifted between them. Something real. Mia met his gaze, her voice barely a whisper. "We're going to take you home." It wasn't a promise she made lightly. It wasn't a word she used carelessly. Home. Something Leo had never known. Something he deserved more than anyone. She rose to her feet, motioning to the others to move in. Gently, carefully, they brought the stretcher close. Leo didn't fight them. He let them lift him, his body sagging but unresisting. He kept his eyes on Mia as they strapped him in, a thread of trust holding him steady. As they wheeled him toward the truck, Mia walked beside him, never once letting him out of her sight. She spoke to him softly, promises she prayed she could keep, words she needed him to believe even if he couldn't understand them. This wasn't the end of Leo's story. It was the beginning. And whatever it took, however long it took, Mia would be there. She had seen his heart, and now he had hers. The ride to the sanctuary felt endless. Mia sat pressed against the stretcher where Leo lay, her hand resting on his side, feeling the slow, uneven rise and fall of his ribs. His eyes stayed half open, glazed with exhaustion, but he never looked away from her for long. Every time she shifted or spoke softly, he responded with the smallest flick of his ear, a faint movement that told her he was still fighting, still here. She kept talking, whispering promises and stories, anything to fill the hollow space between them with something human, something kind. When they arrived, the team moved quickly but carefully. Mia stayed with Leo every second, her presence a tether he seemed to need. His body was too frail to stand, his muscles too wasted from years of confinement. But there was no panic in him, no wildness. Only a heavy, aching trust that made Mia's chest tighten with every look he gave her. They transferred him to a clean enclosure padded with thick straw, medical supplies already waiting. A vet moved in to start the examination, speaking low and calm, but Mia could see the worry in his eyes. Leo's body was a map of old wounds, scar tissue around his neck where the chain had dug in, open sores from lying too long on concrete, infected cuts no one had ever treated. His teeth were worn down, his claws overgrown and cracked. Malnutrition had hollowed out his muscles until it was a wonder he could lift his head at all. Mia knelt by his side through every poke and prod, whispering to him, letting him know he wasn't alone. The first few days were critical. There were moments when Leo barely moved, when his breathing slowed so much that Mia found herself counting the seconds between each rise of his chest. The vets worked around the clock, hydrating him through IVS, cleaning his wounds, administering pain relief as gently as they could. And still, there were hours when it felt like they were losing him. Mia stayed anyway, sleeping upright against the wall, refusing to leave his side even when others urged her to rest. On the third night, just as Mia felt herself slipping into a restless sleep, a low sound rumbled through the enclosure. Her eyes snapped open, heart pounding, and she saw Leo watching her. His mouth moved, and from deep within his chest came a sound so soft, so broken, it almost didn't register. A roar. Faint, raspy, but a roar. Mia pressed her hands to her mouth, tears streaming down her face before she could stop them. It was not the roar of a king, not yet. It was the voice of a soul refusing to disappear. Mia crawled closer, careful not to scare him, and rested her forehead against the edge of his straw bed. "I hear you," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I hear you." And she stayed like that, breathing with him, until the sound faded into a soft, exhausted sigh. It was the first sign Leo gave that he wanted to live, and Mia made herself a promise right then that no matter how hard the road ahead would be, she would walk every step of it with him. Each day, after that first broken roar, Leo began to change. It wasn't sudden, and it wasn't smooth, but Mia saw it in the small moments others might have missed. The way his ears would twitch when he heard her voice. The way his head would lift when she entered the room, even if it dropped back down seconds later. The tiny shift from surviving to trying. Mia celebrated each moment silently, holding them close like fragile pieces of hope she couldn't afford to lose. The team designed gentle exercises to help Leo rebuild the strength his body had long forgotten. At first, even standing was a battle he lost more often than he won. His legs trembled under the weight they hadn't carried freely in so long. Sometimes he collapsed, breathing heavily, his body refusing to cooperate with the will that burned quietly inside him. Mia was there every time, her hand hovering near but never forcing, never rushing. She knelt beside him and spoke to him, her words filled with the kind of patience she hadn't even known she possessed. When Leo finally managed to take one step, just one shaky, awkward step, Mia had to swallow back the emotion that surged up inside her. She didn't clap or cheer. She simply whispered, "Good boy," and let him feel her pride without overwhelming him. Leo paused, as if surprised by his own ability, and then slowly, painfully, tried again. 2 steps. 3. Then his legs gave out and he lay panting. But Mia saw the light in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Progress came slowly. Some days were harder than others. There were mornings when Leo refused to move at all, when fear or pain seemed to chain him down tighter than any rusted collar ever had. Mia didn't push him. She sat by his side, reading aloud, humming old songs, letting him know he wasn't alone in the silence. On better days he would rise without coaxing, testing the limits of his battered body. Mia watched him learn the simple joy of moving without pain, each shaky victory stitching something stronger inside him. As Leo's strength grew, so did his spirit. His eyes lost the hollow look they had worn for so long. His steps, still awkward, became more purposeful. He learned to stretch without fear, to shake out his mane even if it still looked thin and ragged. He began to greet Mia with a soft chuffing sound, something between a sigh and a welcome. And each time she heard it, her heart answered without thinking. But it wasn't just physical. Trust was growing too, slow and delicate. Leo no longer flinched at sudden movements. He didn't shrink back when new volunteers entered the room. He stayed near Mia, always near, but he no longer seemed to carry the weight of terror in every breath. It was a different kind of freedom, one that no bolt cutter could ever provide. It was a freedom built on kindness, on the patient rebuilding of a soul shattered long before the chains had even been cut. And Mia knew, deep down, that the greatest part of Leo's healing was still ahead. The first time Leo froze at the distant sound of metal clinking, Mia knew the scars inside him ran deeper than any wound they could see. He had been walking with her, his steps slow but sure, when the faint noise from another enclosure sent a jolt through his body. His muscles stiffened, his eyes went wide, and he crumpled down without warning, pressing himself low to the ground as if bracing for pain. Mia dropped to her knees beside him, her heart shattering all over again at how quickly the old terror took him back. She didn't speak, she didn't touch him. She simply sat there, letting him know she was there, letting him have the space to fight his demons in his own way. Minutes passed, slow and aching, before Leo dared lift his head again. His whole body shook, his breathing shallow. But when his eyes found Mia's, something fragile and desperate flickered inside them. She stayed grounded, steady, the anchor he needed when the fear tried to drag him under. Setbacks like that became part of their rhythm. Healing was never a straight line. There were days when Leo seemed invincible, his steps stronger, his gaze sharper, only to be undone by a sound or a smell that yanked him back into the darkness he had once lived in. Each time, Mia was there, patient and unwavering, refusing to let him fall alone. Trust didn't grow from big gestures. It grew in these quiet moments, the ones where staying mattered more than fixing. One afternoon, another storm of panic swept over him when a loud crash echoed from a nearby storage shed. Leo bolted across the field, his body a blur of fear and instinct. Mia's heart pounded as she ran after him, calling his name, not to chase but to remind him he wasn't abandoned. She found him cornered against a fence, sides heaving, teeth bared in terror. She stopped several feet away, sinking to the ground without a word. She didn't try to coax him. She didn't reach for him. She simply stayed, her presence soft and constant. Minutes stretched endlessly between them. Leo's chest heaved with every breath, his claws digging into the earth. Slowly, painfully, he shifted his gaze to her. Mia didn't move. She just kept whispering, her voice barely louder than the beat of his heart. He took one trembling step forward, then another, each movement a battle against the ghosts in his mind. When he finally closed the space between them and pressed his forehead against her shoulder, Mia closed her eyes, swallowing the sob that threatened to break free. In that moment, no chain could have held him tighter than the invisible bond they had forged. He had chosen to come back. He had chosen trust over fear. Mia wrapped her arms around his broad, scarred body, knowing this was a different kind of victory, one no one else would ever see but her. Leo wasn't just surviving anymore, he was beginning to live, and he wasn't doing it alone. Leo's world kept expanding. Day by day, step by trembling step, he learned that freedom wasn't just the absence of chains. It was choosing to trust his own legs again, his own instincts, his own heart. Mia watched him from a quiet distance, giving him the space he needed, but never letting him feel alone. His strides grew longer, his back straighter, the light in his eyes steadier. Each small triumph built on the last, and Mia felt an almost painful pride every time he dared to push himself a little further. He began venturing beyond the familiar enclosures, moving into larger fields designed to ease his transition. At first, he hesitated at the open gates, the vastness too much after years of confinement. But Mia waited, patient as ever, her voice a soft encouragement carried by nothing but trust. Slowly, Leo crossed the invisible thresholds. His paws touched earth that no human had forced him toward. It was his choice now, and every step he took rewrote a part of his past. There were no grand moments, no cinematic charges into the open. Leo's reclaiming of his life was quiet, almost shy. He would walk a few steps, look back at Mia, and then walk a few more. It wasn't fear anymore that turned him around. It was habit, the old question of whether someone would still be there if he dared to go too far. Every time he looked, Mia was there, steady as a heartbeat, and Leo learned, little by little, that freedom didn't mean being abandoned. One afternoon, he rolled onto his back in the grass, awkward at first, as if unsure his body would even allow it. Mia stood frozen, tears welling in her eyes as she watched him wiggle clumsily, paws batting at the air. For the first time in 15 years, Leo was playing. No chain, no command, no fear, just pure, simple joy. Mia covered her mouth, overwhelmed by the beauty of it, by the reminder that even the deepest wounds could heal if given enough love, enough patience. As days turned into weeks, Leo began interacting with other rescued lions. Carefully, cautiously, he learned to read their signals, to trust that not every approach meant harm. Watching him nuzzle another lion's mane, seeing him find companionship that no human could ever replace, Mia felt a bittersweet ache. She had been his bridge back to the world, but he was building a life beyond her now. It was exactly what she had fought for, exactly what Leo deserved, and it still broke her heart in the most beautiful way. The sanctuary staff often stopped to marvel at him, whispering about his transformation, but Mia knew the truth. Leo hadn't just been saved, he had saved himself too. She had merely stood by him when the rest of the world had turned away, and standing there, watching him claim every piece of life stolen from him, Mia understood that the greatest kindness wasn't rescuing him from his chains. It was teaching him he had never needed them to define who he was. Years later, Leo lay stretched across the highest ridge of the sanctuary, his massive frame scarred but proud, his mane full and wild again. His eyes, once dulled by suffering, now gleamed with a quiet, unbreakable strength. He had become more than a survivor. He had become a symbol, not just to Mia, but to everyone who had been lucky enough to witness his second life. People came from distant places just to see him, to hear the story of the lion who had endured the unthinkable and still chosen to trust again. Mia sat nearby, knees drawn to her chest, watching him with the same awe she had felt the first day he leaned into her and asked, without words, if it was safe to hope. There were other lions now, younger ones, roaming the fields he had once been too afraid to cross. Leo welcomed them with the patience of someone who knew what it meant to be lost. He had become their leader, not by force, but by simply standing tall when everything in his life had tried to crush him. Sometimes visitors would ask Mia how she had done it, how she had saved a lion that the world had given up on. She never had the right words for them. It hadn't been grand or heroic. It had been one choice, repeated over and over, to stay, to listen, to believe when there was no proof yet that belief would be rewarded. And it wasn't just Leo who had changed. Mia had too. She had learned that kindness wasn't about easy victories. It was about giving, knowing you might never see the result, but choosing to give anyway. Leo shifted, his eyes catching Mia's across the distance, and something passed between them that needed no language. Gratitude, loyalty, love. He didn't need her the way he once had. He didn't need anyone. But that was the true miracle. He had been given back to himself. Mia wiped a tear from her cheek and smiled, the kind that hurt in the best way. She stood slowly, letting Leo see her before she turned to walk away. She knew he would watch her go, not out of fear, but out of the bond they had built, the bond that time and freedom had only deepened. As she walked, Mia thought about the thousands of lives still waiting, still chained by fear or cruelty or neglect, and how easily they could be overlooked. Not everyone would be able to save a lion, but everyone could do something. One act of kindness, one moment of courage, one stubborn decision to see value where others saw none. If Leo could find the strength to trust again, if Mia could find the strength to stay, then maybe, just maybe, the world could change one soul at a time. So ask yourself, today and every day after, whose chain can you break? Whose life can you quietly, stubbornly, beautifully change? Simply by refusing to look away.